Welcome back to Math Concepts. We are going to continue our study of logic. So you'll remember that when we're dealing with this context in the field of logic, the objects that we work with are statements. And we have a handful of operators such as negation, and, or, implication or conditional statement, and biconditional, that we can use to combine statements together to make new ones. And we have truth tables to help us understand whether those new compound statements are true or false based on the truth value of the simple statements that make up our compound statement. Now, one more thing we can do is put some compound statements together to form what's called an argument. And in an argument you have the premise and you have the conclusion. Now, an argument is going to be valid if the conclusion is true, provided that the premises are true. So whenever the premises are true, your conclusion is true. That's a valid argument. So one thing we're going to use to help us work with arguments is symbols, symbolic statements. So you may have to go back to a previous video. We talked about this in the very beginning of the unit on logic, where we were turning statements into symbols. Let's go to the document camera and look at some examples. Okay, so your key idea from this video is being able to write an argument in symbolic form. Okay, so let's get right to an example. So we're going to write the following argument in symbols. So, if she doesn't get on the plane, she will regret it. She does not regret it, therefore she got on the plane. Alright, so let's assign some letters to these statements. Okay, we'll call this P. The statement P is she doesn't get on the plane. P for plane. We'll call this R. She will regret it. Okay, now down here, she does not regret it, so that's not R. She got on the plane, not P. Okay, so compactly in symbols, if she doesn't get on the plane, she will regret it. If P, then R. Alright, that's the symbolic notation for P implies R down here. So that's the first premise. If she doesn't get on the plane, she will regret it. The next premise is she does not regret it, so not R. Okay, and we use this line to separate the premise from the conclusion. And the conclusion was not P. Okay, in the symbolic argument, we usually use those three dots to represent therefore. Okay, so if P then R, not R, therefore not P. All right, so we have chosen a letter to represent each of our statements. And of course, this first thing is a compound statement. It's got two parts. P, she does not get on the plane. Remember, I chose P for plane. R, she will regret it. If she does not get on the plane, then she will regret it. Remember, sometimes we write a conditional without using then. Okay, now you're not going to need a new letter here because that's just the negation of this right here. Okay, so in some cases you'll need a new bunch of letters because it'll be a new statement, but not in this case. Okay, that's just the negation of what we got right here, and then this is the negation of this. Okay, so there's our symbolic form. Let's do one more example. Okay, so once again, an argument for us to write out in symbols. If I am going to run a marathon, then I will buy new shoes. If I buy new shoes, I will not buy a TV. Therefore, if I buy a TV, I will not run a marathon. Okay, so I'm going to introduce some letters here. Okay, this statement here, we're going to call that M. Run a marathon. I'm going to run a marathon. We'll call this S. New shoes. Okay, here's S again. We don't need a new letter, it's the same statement. Okay, now this here is about buying a TV, so we do need a new statement, right? We had a statement involving running a marathon, buying new shoes. This is about buying a TV, so it's a new thing. Let's call that T. In fact, I'm going to call this not T, not buy a TV. Okay, now here in the conclusion, this is buy a TV, so this is T, and not run a marathon, so that's not M. Okay, so let's put this all down in symbols. If I'm going to run a marathon, then I buy new shoes. M implies S. If M, then S. That's the first premise. Second premise. If I buy new shoes, then I will not buy a TV. If S, then not T. And then we have the conclusion. Therefore, if I buy a TV, then I will not run a marathon. If T, then not M. Okay? So those are the symbols that represent this argument here. Okay? Whenever you get a chance to reuse a letter, do it. Okay? But of course, it's got to represent the same statement. Okay? So in the first premise, we have, if I run a marathon, then I buy new shoes. If I buy new shoes, okay, so that's the same statement we've got here. So it's got to get represented by the same letter. And here's our compact symbolic argument. So these arguments and symbols are going to be very handy. They can get a little long. Okay, and you can always distinguish the conclusion by looking for therefore. Okay, therefore indicates we're coming to the conclusion of the argument. Everything before that is the premise of the argument.